His was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's the thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told, keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project, a podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. My name is Chris Kretz and I am your host, and our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. This episode is a little different. Let me set the scene. I just returned from the annual conference of the Association of Public Historians of New York State at Danford's Hotel in Port Jefferson, overlooking the Port Jeff Ferry. And for background, you may not know this, but New York State law requires that every county and municipality in New York have an appointed historian. And their job is to document, preserve, interpret, and share the history of their communities. And this year, their annual conference was on Long Island, so that was a perfect opportunity to talk about all things history, Long Island, and New York State. So I was running a podcasting workshop, official title, How to Be a Podcast Guest. And I've done a few of these episodes before. What part of the workshop is to actually record an episode. So I want to thank the intrepid attendees who sat down at the mic with me. So what you're going to hear today, it's a medley, it's a potpourri. It's a group of like-minded individuals all interested in preserving and promoting the history of their areas. You'll hear some familiar voices, some others from Long Island, and we had a few from greater New York State just to change up the mix a little. If you are in the area of any of these people and you hear them describing their projects and their work, by all means reach out to them, see if you can get involved, see if you can help support local history in your area. And if you ever wondered what historians talk about amongst themselves, you're about to find out. Cemeteries, project planning, supply chains, part professional development, part sharing of interests, a little bit of a mutual therapy session, but all people passionate about New York history and all today's very special guests.
I'm Ross Lumpkin. I'm the town historian at the town of North Hempstead and a trustee at the Cowneck Peninsula Historical Society. My pet project, I would call it, is the restoration of a local cemetery, the Montfort Cemetery. That's in Port Washington.
So what's involved in restoring a cemetery?
Oh, everything. It never ends. It's first things we do was just getting to know the cemetery, we were able to win a grant to get a conditions survey done, in which we got some professionals in who examined the stones and gave us estimates on what it would cost or what's worth doing.
So there's some age involved, some overgrowth, I guess, or like cleaning up the
there's
physical.
Tons of overgrowth. That's the other part of maintaining it, which is tough. But I've been pretty lucky. The town, which is actually required by law to clean it up because we own the cemetery, we being the town. They're required by law to be doing cleaning, but they need a push. So I think any project really needs a champion who is going to be the ones to give out a gentle push to people to help out.
I'm Marilyn Hayden, and I am the village historian of Greenwood Lake. Greenwood Lake is in Orange County. It's a 9-mile lake, half of which is in New Jersey and the other half in New York. Well, in Greenwood Lake, we have been working since January, celebrating our centennial. It's 100 years since we became a incorporated village. We previously were a part of a town called Warwick. This centennial idea is sort of one of those things that grew and grew and grew. And I think we've sort of exhausted everybody, not our audience yet. We may by the end of the year, but not yet.
Have you had the big event yet?
We've had several big events, is my point, that we just keep doing
keep celebrating. Yes. That's great.
But one of the things to mention happens to deal with time capsule. So 50 years ago, they did a time capsule. So we decided that we would, unveil it, have a big unveiling. Some of the issues that made everybody nervous was that we, in the records, we learned that they had put the things in a child's coffin and buried the coffin. So everybody was like, what do we do? Do we tell people that we're going to be opening a coffin?
Be prepared.
Or do we just... Well, we heard from other towns with their time capsules that you can have tremendous surprises. And the village of Warwick's surprise about 2 years ago was when they had the whole town, like 100 and more people gathered to unveil, was when they dug it up, it was encased in cement. So they couldn't open it.
Oh, wow.
They had
was
to
that
get,
by design?
They had to get the people who did it, yes, but nobody knows. It's not recorded. So they had to get a jackhammer, so they couldn't do it immediately. So they had to send everybody home and choose another day. So we were going to get clever. And we made the decision that we would dig it up first. We wouldn't necessarily open it. We might open it, we might not, but we would see that it's there. And, what it was. We're not going to be surprised. And so there was this... It was very nicely marked. There's a stone wall and a brass plaque that says right here beneath this plaque is where it's buried. And so we come, there's about 4 or 5 of us, and we have the town come with the machinery, and they dig, and there's nothing there. We don't know what to do. Finally, someone remembers that they had taken down the wall and moved it.
No.
With the plaque, exactly where it is. So the end result is that we had to go through of trying to, and we did find it, and we went through it. So that when everybody shows up, we were able to do it.
Good record keeping. That's key.
The end result is that you learn from your troubles, and so we are going to do another time capsule. However, we're going to put it in a metal container in the basement of the library.
My name is Amy Folk. I am the town historian for Southold. I am also the manager of collections for the Oyster Pond Historical Society and the Southold Historical Museum. And I'm also one of the co-hosts of the AFNI's conference today.
And Amy, what's going on with you?
I don't know. I have to think. I have so many different things going on. It's like I'm not sure what to talk about.
Sure.
At the town, I've been working on researching for the last 5 years the history of the Indians that were there, and they're physically extinct, but they probably merged with the Shinnecock and the Montaukets.
What was the original?
They were called the Korchog, but as it was pointed out to me by several people and tribes that just like you and I do not have names for who we are other than we're New Yorkers or from the U.S. or something like that, they didn't necessarily have names for themselves. So calling them the Korchog is somewhat artificial. There were people who lived in the Korchog area is more the case of what it is. So in our rush to do history of the European settlers, nobody ever bothered in 375 years to do the history of these people. So it's been an uphill climb trying to find primary source information to talk about them.
I'm Debbie Allen. I'm the Oswego County historian. Oswego County is right on the shore of Lake Ontario, so we're the upper part of the state. Mm-hmm. We just formed a 250th commission, and as soon as the chairman of the legislature appoints the first 2 people, we can finally meet.
Okay. Is that usually a challenge, or is that a...
I have been pulling teeth for a year to get where we are.
Okay, great. And so when is that anniversary date? Is that next year or this year still?
No, the 250th is in 2026. So we still have...
Plenty of time.
Yeah. Not much time.
I'm Gabrielle. I am on the board of the Brightwaters Historical Society, which is on the South Shore of Long Island. We operate together as the village historian. I am also an adult reference and local history librarian at the Bayshore Brightwaters Public Library. In both cases, I'm actually in the process with other coworkers in gaining intellectual control and understanding of our collections at this point. The Brightwaters Historical Society established themselves last year. So really kind of ground up, figuring out what we have, how to share it with our community, how to preserve it, and organize everything.
So I don't know if would be the youngest society at this event, but how hard was it to get that going?
So I should say I only started with them in January. They started last May, and I'm very proud of them and very impressed that they could figure out how to kind of get everything together and become formally a 501(c)(3). And so, but when I came in, I ended up writing a lot of the founding documents, a constitution and bylaws and all of that. So it's very interesting to be creating a lot of policy and not just following it.
Yeah, no, and it's great. I don't know if we would all agree, but you hear a lot about the challenges to historical societies losing members, and so to know that there are new ones being born, it's great to hear.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. The community has a very positive response at this point. So in July, we actually celebrated our groundbreaking anniversary for groundbreaking of the development of Brightwaters. So it was fun to do a lot of research into the very beginnings and get to present in front of the community. We had 150 people come.
That's great.
It was crazy.
My name is John Tracy. I'm not a historian by any means, but I can talk a little bit to the history of supply chains because I've been in it for a long time. And just as an aside on all of this, there is no such thing as a supply chain. It's invented every day, again and again and again. Having said that, I've worked in all the elements of what would be called a supply chain. Fascinating. Been a lot of fun.
It's funny, I interviewed someone once about a Broadway actors strike, and she mentioned that every industry has their own history and every, I guess, concept. So it's interesting that the history of the supply chain. And just out of curiosity, so we're sitting at a New York State History Conference. What brought you to the conference?
My wife's a historian. Secondly, I've enjoyed the people that I meet here, and they give me thoughts from another angle. For example, you just mentioned Broadway theater, as I recall. I've done a lot of supply systems for Broadway theater. I've also done supply systems for museums. Libraries are a good example of an indexing system that is used throughout the supply chain world. In fact, there's a lot that the library system could learn from the use of the supply chain. I could find a part any place in the world if I design the right supply chain. And I can find a watch part in South Africa on the 7th floor of a building downtown on the third draw on the racking system from the right, and get very specific about it, where it is and how much it costs and where it's going to go. And that becomes important in today's world, for example, where we've got a lot of legacy things. People want to fix their old whatever. And where do you find a part?
That's interesting. And I don't know if anyone at the table now can answer this, but when you just said that, I can imagine people running historic homes or historic houses or getting donations of old things. And anyone can answer this if you want to come over. Is there an industry for vintage supply chains? Like if you need to find a piece to a 1920s typewriter, or if you're restoring a mansion to 1895, are there channels to find equipment that might restore it to the authenticity you're looking for?
To the best of my knowledge, there's no database of where you're going to find those parts.
Nicole, I don't know if you were nodding to that question. Do you have any you would want to? Well, I would just have to bring you on mic if you don't mind.
My name's Nicole Minkese, and I work for the Long Island Library Resources Council. I was listening to a podcast about the show The Gilded Age, where they asked this similar question about timepieces and authentic, like housewares and things from that time period, the Gilded Age, 1890s, 1880s, and if they find a piece, how they have to go and find someone who knows how to fix the lamp or the clock or the watch so that it can be as authentic as possible. So I thought that was kind of neat that they would have to use all of their resources throughout New York
Right.
City and Los Angeles and whatnot, the bigger cities, to try and find the supplies.
The right
like you're
chain
saying,
of-
it's not easy to do.
My name is Robert Finnegan. I'm with the Historical Society of Islip Hamlet. And it's last Sunday we just ran our 4th cemetery tour, Oakwood Cemetery on Brentwood Road and Moffett Boulevard. And it was very, very successful. We had beautiful weather. And it was a walking tour. And we had 12 sites. We have people in period costumes. They reenact the person that is buried at that site. And we do primary and secondary research. And so it was very, very well received. And we can continue to enhance our skills with people doing the presentations, as well as how deep our research goes in presenting. So it was a very, very successful program.
I know they've done that in Oakdale too, so I guess that's
Well, we actually do it better than Oakdale.
But I mean, it's an interesting skill set because you're sort of dramatizing a life, or you have
Yes.
to come up with a way to talk about a life.
And it's 40 acres. Is plenty of 19,000 people have been buried there. And it was part of that late cemetery movement to make it a park-like setting before public parks. So it really fits into that. We actually had people in Victorian mourning wear picnicking because it was called Sunday's Best. So you would go to Mass or wherever whatever congregation you belong to or faith you belong to. Then afterwards you would go to the cemetery to pay respects to your loved ones, as well as they would set up a picnic, and they would spend the whole day there in the absence of a public park.
Regina Feeney. I am librarian and archivist at the Freeport Memorial Library and village historian for the Incorporated Village of Freeport. I just put together an exhibit at the Freeport Memorial Library on 120 years of Freeport High School football.
Ah.
Yeah.
What's their mascot name?
The Red Devil.
Okay.
And before that, it was just, they were known as the Red and Whites, and then they were the Scarlet Hurricane. And I found out in the 30s, many of the students wanted some kind of creature to intimidate the other teams, and that's where the Red Devil came from.
And I'm sorry, where is that display now?
That is at the Freeport Memorial Library.
And Nicole, you want to tell us more about what you're working on, or?
So essentially my job is to go to historical societies and specifically small house museums. Sometimes the larger ones have me come by, and I do site visits, and I talk to them about whatever it is they're trying to accomplish short term. Sometimes it's getting their paperwork together as far as understanding things like collections management policy, and I guess I should explain that it's all about archives and preservation, and so sometimes they just don't know what they need, and they want me to come in and just help them start making a plan for creating a catalog for their objects. So it's exciting work. Sometimes it's a little heartbreaking, but
How so heartbreaking?
I guess it's sad that there isn't enough funding for a lot of these locations to have permanent or at least one full-time staff member. I've been lucky to have always been employed and been able to eke out a living as an archivist and a collections manager, but it's not easy for a lot of the smaller organizations to be able to do that. Maybe if they are lucky and they have a good fundraiser, they can have somebody part-time. So that's the thing. I'm happy that we at least are able to offer the services of an archivist and an archivist's opinion to these locations and just guide them along. But yeah, there's a lot of beautiful things out there that still have to be uncovered, and it's just going to take so much time and effort to get there.
Right. And paying attention, to things as buildings are vacated or people pass on, and their collections or the things they leave behind, are there organizations that can step up and take them, or can alert people, hey, this was a famous person or a noteworthy person in the community, and where is all this stuff going? It doesn't end up in a dumpster that you have to kind of hunt for later.
And having the forethought to plan ahead for that inevitability that mom and dad are going to pass, and they've got some really great documents, talking to their parents or whomever in their family about making a plan to donate their things so that it does go to the right location.
Now, there's a question that I was talking to someone about this morning, and since the four of us at this table are from Long Island, I'll change it a little bit. But in your work, the three of you in different areas, do you see the history of Long Island different or distinct from the history of New York State? Because I was talking to someone this morning about, upstate and how do they view Long Island. So in the work that you all do you often connect it to the larger state, or you pretty much, you don't see overlap, or to what extent do you see New York State history connecting to Long Island history?
Well, in studying Islip history, it is distinct. We were actually, and early on in history, we were tied more closely to Connecticut and Rhode Island. A lot of the family connections came from the Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and emigrated to Long Island, Suffolk County specifically. And even during the Revolution, I think it was mentioned yesterday by County Executive Laval that Suffolk County was clearly rebel territory versus Queens and Kings County. So, and in fact, after the Battle of Long Island, there was nearly 5,000 Long Islanders, families, not just the people in battle, but the entire families, were refugees to Connecticut or Rhode Island. So there is a significant difference. The Long Island Railroad made a big difference. We are a commuting community. I used the Long Island Railroad for 33 years going into the city. A great 2-hour ride. It's really wonderful. But I do think there's a distinction between, we see a distinction between Long Island and the city of New York.
And Regina, not to say that this should be an issue or so, but do you see New York State sort of as a separate entity historically wise?
I do, but I also think that people's perception of Long Island history, they always think of the North Shore and they always think of Suffolk County. And being on the South Shore, closer to the Queens border, I always felt that we were invisible, that people never thought of us. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we were so tied to loyalists during the Revolutionary War, and so our history kind of got buried. Our history, where I am in Freeport, is so tied to Brooklyn, because we were a before the Long Island Railroad, before the tunnel, people would just come by boat or by trolley and land in Freeport, and they summered there. And we were the Hamptons before the Hamptons, and we were a big actors colony in the 1920s. But as tied to the rest of the state, no, I think people settled in Freeport from the city, and then some people may have gone upstate, but not too many upstaters came down to us, except for teachers. That's something really interesting. A lot of our teachers did come from the Albany Normal School.
Okay.
Teachers school. And so that's where we start to see that upstate connection, is so many of the teachers would go back to upstate during the breaks.
Okay, interesting. So Nicole, does that resonate with you at all, talking about New York State versus?
Well, I have a little different take. I'm from Tennessee, so I moved here 16 years ago.
You have the outsider's perspective.
I'm definitely, the 15-year outsider perspective. I've never and will probably ever live anywhere that's more historic than Long Island. Certainly haven't ever lived anywhere as beautiful as Long Island and as diverse. I can't really speak to how I think the outside world thinks of Long Island, other than to say that we think of Manhattan and then we think of the state. And Long Island, for a lot of the country, is kind of this. It's a sad thing that it's a bit of an afterthought. Until I came to Long Island, I had no idea about what I was getting into or what I was going to find. I'm driving down roads, houses founded 1653. So it's fantastic. And, we're standing here looking over an old boatyard that was building 150 years ago. So it's kind of interesting to think about Long Island as kind of its own separate place. I mean, it really kind of joke around saying it should be its own state.
That's been floated.
It's been floated. Yeah, I've done a little research. I knew I wasn't the first person to think of this.
I don't want to leave things unsaid. Anyone from outside of Long Island want to chime in, from your perspective?
I'd love to chime in. I'm in Long Island, but I thought, is it all right?
Yeah, sure. And would you as well?
Well, I would just add to everybody, I think, like everybody else, you feel ignored that we've been lost to history. Port Washington is on the North Shore, North Hempstead, and it's a very wealthy, kind of high-end area. And that's kind of left us out of. Here, give an example of what I'm trying to get to. The cemetery that I was talking about is an old Dutch cemetery. And the Dutch played an important role in Port Washington in the Revolution, and nobody knows about it. There's been, in the last 20 years, so much has been discovered about the Dutch and talked about. And it's really interesting, but it's all about New York City and the Hudson up to Albany, and we kind of get lost in the shuffle. I think part of it's because it's our own fault. We're so developed, we're so wealthy. The Levitts were up in Port Washington, and they took over this wonderful old farm which had Shelter Rock on it. Shelter Rock is the biggest boulder in all of Long Island and possibly New York State, and now it's hidden away. It was on ended up on the Payne Whitney estate. So it's like all this money came in and kind of, we didn't do a good job preserving our history.
And you want to chime in?
Okay. I live in Oswego County, which is just across the lake from Canada. So we're just about as far from Long Island as we can get. And upstate New York settled totally different than downstate. And by the way, upstate doesn't start until you get to Watertown, which is north of us. And we're just across the lake from Canada. So, when people from downstate say upstate and they mean everything north of the Hudson,
but we all have our mental map of. Yeah. So, just one quick follow-up. So, in your work as a historian, how much or has Long Island ever come in? Do you have a mental model of Long Island history, or how deeply had you thought about it, or do you see it connecting to your area?
We don't really consider the downstate areas to be connected to us.
Okay.
We know that the Revolutionary War was more down here than it was up there, but the Fort Ontario, which is in Oswego, is actually the last place evacuated by the British in the Revolutionary War. And it was 13 years after the war ended.
Ah, that's a fun fact.
So, yeah.
Okay, and you wanted to add?
Yeah, I came over because I wanted to add to that particular conversation. Sure. Long Island seems to have been forgotten by most of New York State, if you ask me. If you go over to the booksellers over here, ask them how many books they got on Long Island, and there's virtually nothing. I was talking to one of the older historians that I know who's not here today, and I said, well, why do you think Long Island history has been forgotten by the rest of New York State? He said, well, you know something? We're one of the last places to have a university that was founded here. So all of the other parts of the country, Yale and Harvard and all the other areas, they had university centers that were founded, and they started doing their history right away. So when you think of the American Revolution, it's usually taught as being in New England, right? How many people think of cowpens in the Carolinas as part of the American Revolution? When you think about some of all the other different types of major points in history, they're all someplace else. But Long Island had a very important role that was played during the American Revolution as an occupied location, and we've never been taught it. Literally, we were smack in the middle of war, and nobody ever taught us our own history.
Sure, good.
While I am the historian of Greenwood Lake, I was born on Long Island and lived here until I was in my 20s. I was born in South Nassau Hospital in Oceanside and lived in Valley Stream. One of my earliest memories was when I think it was the Daily News, put out the possible evacuation in case of a nuclear war. and they had all, Westchester and Rockland, and where everybody was to go. But Nassau and Suffolk were to stay put. I had nightmares over that we weren't to go anyplace. Everybody else was to go someplace, but not us. And the reason was because congestion, we can't get you guys out, so you just stay there.
Good luck. Right. And we do have a bias sample in that a lot of us around the table are Long Islanders, so I don't want to discount all the great work being done at this conference and by other speakers about upstate history and all of that. But it is good we can talk and get some of this stuff out there amongst ourselves.
Yes.
I just want to thank today's guests again. You heard from Ross and Marilyn and Amy and Debbie and Gabrielle and John and Robert and Regina. I thank them all. Hopefully you'll hear them on another podcast soon, whether it's as a guest or as a host. I want to thank the APH NYS for having me at their conference. Had a great time, saw some great speakers while I was there. Their current president is Christine Radarski from the city of Rochester, and if you want to learn more about what they do, you can find them online at aphnys.org. And I would say more importantly, look at whatever your municipality. If you're in New York State, look up who your state-appointed historian is. Find out what they're doing, see how you can get involved, how you can help. Learn more about the history of where you live. That does it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Our outro music is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution 4.0 international license. You can find links to related resources in our show notes. That's at longislandhistoryproject.org. And if you're involved in Long Island history and you'd like to be a guest, drop us a line at longislandhistoryproject@gmail.com. But as always, thank you for listening.